Everyone is talking about the quote. You've seen the headlines. You've seen the outrage. You've seen the clips of President Trump telling the New York Times that the only thing constraining his power is his own morality. But while the media is hyper-focused on those three words, they are ignoring the verifiable action that actually took place in the Senate less than 24 hours ago. While the cameras were pointed at the White House, the U.S. Senate passed a bipartisan war powers resolution to stop the president's military operations in Venezuela. The vote was 52 to 47. 5 Republicans broke ranks to join Democrats. This is not a drill. This is not campaign rhetoric. We have a sitting president openly declaring he does not need international law and a Senate explicitly voting to strip him of his war powers in response to a military invasion that has already happened. We are witnessing a direct constitutional collision between Article 1 and Article 2 of the Constitution. And yet, the mainstream narrative isn't discussing the legal mechanics of this crisis. They are discussing whether the president is mean or unhinged. They are focusing on the personality. We need to focus on the power. Because while they argue about morality, the administration has already confirmed that the United States is now effectively running a South American nation and, quote, taking the oil. Welcome to the brief. To understand what is actually happening, we first have to look at how this story has been packaged for you by the legacy media. Yesterday, January 8th, the New York Times published an extensive interview with President Trump. This interview was conducted in the aftermath of a military operation last weekend, where U.S. forces entered Caracas, Venezuela, and captured President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. The media's framing of this interview has been uniform. From The Guardian to The Mirror, the headlines are almost identical. Trump says power constrained only by my own morality. The narrative technique here is selective outrage. The press is framing this as a story about a leader's ego. They are analyzing his psychological state. They are bringing on pundits to discuss the definition of megalomania. They are linking this comment to his desire to buy Greenland, portraying the president as a whimsical figure treating global geopolitics like a real estate board game. By focusing on the scandalous nature of the morality quote, they are minimizing the strategic reality that the president laid out in the very same interview. They are largely ignoring or treating as a side note the specific justifications he gave regarding China and Russia. They are minimizing the fact that he explicitly compared this operation to past U.S. failures to argue for a new doctrine of competence. And most importantly, they are burying the economic motive. The media wants you to believe this is about a man who thinks he is a king. But when you read the transcripts and look at the filings, you see something different. You see a president who is admitting out loud the quiet part of American foreign policy that has existed for decades. He isn't saying he is a dictator. He is saying that the current international rules-based order is a fiction, and he is the only one willing to admit it. When asked about international law, he didn't just dismiss it. He said, "It depends on what your definition of international law is. That is not the rambling of a madman. That is a negotiation posture." The media is framing this as a moral crisis. We need to analyze it as a geopolitical shift. They are shouting about the words. We are going to look at the leverage. Let's put aside the outrage and look strictly at the evidence. Here is what we know based on the transcripts, official statements, and legislative records from the last 48 hours. In his interview with the New York Times, President Trump was asked directly about the limits of his authority after the Venezuela operation. His exact response was, "Yeah, there's one thing. My own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me." He followed this by stating, "I don't need international law." However, and this is the nuance the clips cut out, he immediately qualified that statement. When pressed, he conceded, "I do," meaning he does need to abide by it, but added the caveat, "It depends on what your definition of international law is." This is critical. The president is not claiming the law doesn't exist. He is claiming the authority to interpret it unilaterally. We know the administration's justification for the seizure of Nicolas Maduro is not just human rights. It is explicitly operational and economic. In the same interview, the president contrasted his operation with the failures of his predecessors. He specifically cited the Jimmy Carter administration. Quote, "You didn't have a Jimmy Carter crashing helicopters all over the place." He also referenced the Biden administration, saying, "You didn't have a Biden Afghanistan disaster where they couldn't do the simplest maneuver." The evidence shows the president is building a mandate based on competence. The argument he is making to the American public is, "I broke the rules, but it worked. They followed the rules and they failed." This is the part that should be front page news, but isn't. According to reports from The Telegraph and India Strategic, the president was explicit about the future of Venezuela. He stated that the U.S. will be running the country. He stated, quote, "We're going to be using oil and we're going to be taking oil." He claimed this would get oil prices down and that the U.S. would rebuild Venezuela in a very profitable way. This is a direct admission of resource extraction as a primary outcome of military intervention. We are not inferring this. He said it. While the president claims his morality is the only check, the legislative branch disagrees. On Thursday, January 8th, the Senate advanced a war powers resolution. The vote was 52 to 47. All Democrats voted in favor. They were joined by 5 Republicans: Rand Paul, Todd Young, Lisa Murkowski, Josh Hawley, and Susan Collins. This resolution explicitly requires the president to seek Congress's approval for military action against Venezuela. The president's response to this was documented on Truth Social. He called the resolution unconstitutional and stated that the Republicans who voted for it should never be elected to office again. Here is the sequence of events. Last weekend, U.S. forces conduct a raid in Caracas. Maduro is captured and flown to New York. Wednesday, John 7. Domestic tensions rise. An ICE agent fatally shoots a woman in Minneapolis, sparking protests. This provides the backdrop of domestic unrest. Thursday, Jan 8. The NYT interview drops. The Senate votes. The president doubles down on his morality comment. We do not know the status of the interim government in Venezuela. We know Delcy Rodriguez is technically in place, but Trump has said she remains only as long as she does what we want. We do not know if the House will pass the war powers resolution. And we do not know how the Supreme Court will rule if the president ignores that resolution. That is the evidence. The president claims total authority. The Senate has voted to stop him, and the U.S. military is currently occupying the energy infrastructure of a foreign nation. Anchor. Now, let's look at how the system is reacting to this information. The reaction from the political establishment has been frantic but contradictory. First, let's look at the international response. France has issued a condemnation. The French president accused the U.S. of turning away from allies. The Guardian reports that British and European diplomats are scrambling, with editorials suggesting that America's allies must find new ways to guarantee their own interests. This is diplomatically significant. It signals that our traditional allies no longer view Washington as a partner in a shared legal framework, but as a volatile superpower to be managed. The Democrats, led by Senator Tim Kaine, are using the morality quote to paint the president as a dictator. They are framing the war powers resolution as a defense of democracy. But look at the hypocrisy here. For decades, under both Democratic and Republican administrations, the United States has engaged in regime change, drone strikes, and extraterritorial seizures without congressional approval. The difference now is not the act, but the articulation. Trump is saying the quiet part out loud. He is stripping away the veneer of humanitarian intervention and calling it what it is: power. The establishment is reacting with horror, not because he violated sovereignty. They've done that for years, but because he violated the etiquette of sovereignty. He didn't use the polite language of the State Department. He used the language of a landlord. Ownership, he told The Times, is psychologically needed for success. The media is swirling around the Greenland narrative again. Because Trump mentioned Greenland in the interview, outlets are treating this as a quirky side story. They are mocking the idea this is a mistake. By mocking the Greenland purchase, they are dismissing the expansionist doctrine explicitly laid out in the interview. They are laughing at the clown while the clown is redrawing the map. Notice the shift. He didn't engage with the legal arguments of the war powers resolution. He attacked the political viability of the senators who voted for it. He didn't say they are wrong on the law, he said they should never be elected again. He is reacting to a legal check with a political threat. The system is blinking red. The media is screaming morality. The Senate is screaming Constitution. And the president is pointing at the gas prices and saying, "You're welcome." So, where does this go next? Based on the evidence and the incentives of the actors involved, we can make a specific prediction. The Senate has fired a warning shot. The media is in a frenzy. The president is feeling emboldened by what he views as a successful military operation. Within the next week, we will see a formal move from the White House to render the War Powers Resolution moot. Expect the narrative to shift from military occupation to economic partnership within 72 hours. I predict the president will announce a major deal or executive order regarding Venezuelan energy assets. He will frame this not as a military action, which Congress can regulate, but as a trade or national security economic measure, which the executive branch has broader control over. He will use the leverage of cheap oil to fracture the fragile bipartisan coalition in the Senate. He will dare the Republicans who voted against him to vote against lower gas prices. Why? Because Trump operates on transaction, not statute. He knows that if he can show a tangible economic benefit to the American voter, specifically lower energy costs, the abstract arguments about international law and war powers will evaporate in the court of public opinion. He is betting that the American public cares more about the price at the pump than the sovereignty of Venezuela. And historically, that is a safe bet. Watch for the pivot to energy independence. That is the shield he will use to block the Senate's sword. We are in a dangerous moment, not just because of what the president is saying, but because of what the media is failing to explain. They are selling you a soap opera about a man's ego. The reality is a constitutional crisis about war, resources, and the limits of power. The establishment, both in the media and in Washington, thrives on the outrage cycle. It distracts you from the documents, the votes, and the money. They don't want this information getting out. They prefer you emotional and uninformed. If you want to help us fight the algorithm and spread the truth, you know what to do. Stay skeptical. Stay informed. We'll see you in the next brief.